Good afternoon, everyone. You are joining the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council for one of our quarterly webinars. This one is on benchmarking best practices. Today, we'll be discussing benchmarking for commercial and public buildings. I'm Jessica Green, Outreach Director with VAEEC. The VAEEC is a broad coalition working to facilitate discussions and share resources to advance energy efficiency throughout the Commonwealth. We engage our 100+ members to identify barriers to and opportunities for energy efficiency advancement and to develop a strong fact-based and balanced industry voice before policymakers and regulators. A couple of logistics before we get started. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions from the audience. Please type your questions in the chat box and we'll receive questions in the order that they appear. Everyone should have already received a PDF of today's presentation in their email this morning. We'll also be sending out an audio recording afterward. We have quite the lineup of benchmarking experts here with us today. As Senior Manager of Technology and Innovation, Patti Boyd is the subject matter expert representing the DC Sustainable Energy Utilities technical interest with various external stakeholders in the District of Columbia. She identifies opportunities to design and implement innovative programs and initiatives to achieve DC SEU's multiple performance benchmarks, including total energy savings, greenhouse gas reductions, green jobs, energy savings and low-income communities, renewable energy generation, and working with the district's large energy users. As an energy data analysis for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Brandi Frazier Bestpitch serves in the Division of Energy at the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to develop, implement, and maintain the state's energy data warehouse. In addition to data management and analytics, Brandi serves as DMME's lead for petroleum emergencies and energy assurance and resiliency planning as part of Virginia's Energy Assurance Plan. Brandi has over 20 years of experience in database management, communications, crisis management, and project management as a previous manager for an international import-export shipping company. John Morrill is manager in the Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination for Fairfax County. He previously worked for Arlington County for 20 years and for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy in Washington, DC, earlier in his career. He is currently chair of the board of directors of VAEEC. Managing the Virginia Energy Management Program for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Nguyen serves in the Division of Energy at the Department of Mines, Mineral, and Energy to develop and implement a vision to reduce energy consumption and energy cost for state facilities while acting as the technical lead for the executive branch on energy issues. His office promotes renewable energy projects for the state and localities such as solar, wind, and energy storage. He manages statewide energy contracts for state facilities, energy efficiency projects through the State Energy Savings Performance Contracting Program, and works with a sole curtailment service provider to coordinate state facilities load curtailment as part of the demand response program. And finally, JoAnna Saunders is the Energy Benchmarking Program Manager for the District Department of Energy and Environment. She's responsible for all day-to-day operations of the benchmarking program and manages the annual collection, review, disclosure, and enforcement of benchmarking data. JoAnna also works closely with the Building Energy Performance Standard team to advance the development of these new standards and ensure the district meets its aggressive energy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. Brandi and Nguyen will be covering benchmarking the Commonwealth's public buildings. John will follow with an overview of and insights on benchmarking efforts in Arlington and Fairfax counties. Patti and JoAnna will wrap things up with a look at DC's successful benchmarking program, including lessons learned and best practices. So let's just jump right on in.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to thank the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council for inviting us to speak on today's Benchmarking Best Practices panel and to have the opportunity to share with you the state's efforts around recent legislation amending the Virginia Code to include section number 2.2-604.2. This important legislation tasks state agencies to work with DMME on incorporating state facility utility data into an energy management tool which will aid in highlighting facility best practices and identify areas of improvement as part of the state's Lead by Example program. Next slide, please. To start off, I want to highlight why commercial building energy management is important. From data compiled by the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, residential and commercial buildings use 40% of America's energy. Our homes and buildings combined currently use more energy than any other sector, making energy efficiency high-impact beneficial investments. Next slide, please. The Virginia Department of General Services Division of Real Estate and Facilities Management reports that the Commonwealth owns 10,888 buildings comprising of 117 million square feet of space. This data alone compels state agencies and localities to lead by example to decrease energy and water use and improve its sustainability footprint, a policy which was further strengthened by the 2018 Energy Plan, the 2019 Executive Order Number 43, and more recently, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which was signed into legislation last year. It is important to note, however, that out of these 10,000 plus buildings, the size, function, and energy consumption and cost of the DGS Monroe building, with over 574,000 square feet, is staggering compared to a 1,000 square foot VDOT storage shed. Next slide, please. The best way to start saving energy in your building is through benchmarking. That is, by comparing your building's past performance as well as its performance against its peers or similar buildings. Once buildings in your portfolio are benchmarked, you'll have the tools to identify underperforming buildings to target efficiency improvements, identify best practices from efficient building in order to replicate those energy saving successes, verify your savings over time, share and report on building performance. One key metric used for benchmarking is energy use intensity, or EUI. EUI is basically energy per square foot per year. It's calculated by dividing the total energy used by the building in 1 year by the total gross floor area of the building. Despite the similar size of the two buildings in this example, which are both used for office space, benchmarking highlights that the Westmoreland is a bit more energy intensive. However, EUI cannot stand alone. It's important to understand that property types such as library, office space, laboratory, data center, etc., are important variables that must be factored into this metric. Energy managers who compare the energy usage of like buildings as size and function in their portfolio gain further insight into how these buildings use energy and whether or not more energy intensive facilities may benefit from energy efficient measures to improve performance. Next slide, please. The first step in effective energy management and facility benchmarking is accurate data. Having accurate data yields more robust metrics, providing more intuitive insights into how the building is performing. Working closely with building managers and utilities is key to ensuring the data is accurate. Next slide, please. I cannot stress this point enough. It's all about the data. Good data yields good metrics, beneficial analytics, and meaningful visualizations. For the initial facility setup, DMME is working with state energy managers to identify facilities and collect the following details: building name, building use type, square footage, year built, account number, utility, etc. Next slide, please. To assist building managers compile data needed for successful energy management, we've created templates that include the required fields necessary to build a robust energy management profile. Next slide, please. We procured the energy and utility management software EnergyCap in 2009 and have been working to organize the facility hierarchy, adding utility usage and billing data, and constructing agency-specific dashboards for the 6,000 or so facilities from the state's portfolio that qualify. Agency-specific dashboards have been rolled out on DMME's website under the Division of Energy's VEMP homepage. You can see the address in this slide. From the DMME Energy Dashboard, top energy consuming agencies can access their agency-specific public dashboard by clicking their respective energy icon in the middle of the page. At this time, we're only tracking electric. However, we have developed a very forward-thinking design that is flexible and adaptable to easily allow for the incorporation of additional utility data such as water, gas, and oil, as well as new technologies as they're rolled out. Next slide, please. Dashboards and maps provide visual insight into the data, displaying key data points based on utility bills. Agency dashboards have been set up to include various widgets highlighting key metrics such as top 20 building calendarized use or cost per area, 12-month electric performance, highest to lowest cost meters, calendarized commodity spending trends, EUI, just to name a few, as well as links to beneficial resources such as Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, that's a mouthful, Building Performance Database, Energy Star Data, and Energy Information Administration websites. We can create and customize different dashboards for individual agencies, higher education institutions, as well as support localities as requested. As part of our Lead by Example initiative, dashboards that track year-over-year facility performance are accessible to the public. Registered users, including agency building managers, will have password-protected access to drill down into the data to allow for more granular analysis. Next slide, please. Building managers will also have access to facility reporting tools featuring a library of over 300 canned reports, including monthly trends, monthly utility use and cost, cost avoidance, meter summary, year-over-year comparison of buildings, commodities, place types, etc. Energy managers can easily customize reports to suit their needs. Reports can be downloaded into user-friendly formats such as Excel or PDF. Frequently used reports can be saved in the building manager's frequently used report folder for quick access and easy distribution. Next slide. DMME is excited about working with state and locality building managers to make this project a success. As interest and support grows, we have the resources to assist localities to stand up and host similar energy management programs, absorbing the cost burden and parsing out features for direct maintenance. This concludes my presentation, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have regarding the project during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandi. We'll now be transitioning to John.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Happy to be here with VAEEC and your all the participants. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick outline of what I'm going to cover. VAEEC reached out to me, really asking me to share the experience from the Arlington voluntary benchmarking program that we had for commercial office buildings about 10 years ago, as it's relevant to this material. And I'm happy to do so, but I've recently changed to work for Fairfax County, and so I also want to give a nod and show some of the benchmarking resources that we're using. These were all established prior to my joining the county, but it's great to see that it's there. And then as an introduction to talking about the Arlington commercial benchmarking, I'm going to spend a few slides talking about EUIs. Brandi already gave a great overview of EUIs and how useful they can be. I've got a little bit more information on the distribution of buildings and EUIs. Next slide, please. So first, as I was going through some older papers, I came across this resource on benchmarking, and I had actually forgotten about this, but back in the 70s, when there were the oil shocks, there were a few broad general market books on energy and energy policy. And this book, which came out in 1979 and was used as a textbook in many college courses, speaks to energy and benchmarking. And they gave an experience from Dow Chemical, which had an outstanding energy benchmarking program for their own. And it really emphasized that benchmarking and use of metrics is very important. So benchmarking energy use is not new, and fortunately we have many accessible tools that we can use to show benchmarking. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple of screenshots from Fairfax County's online dashboard. And I've got some hot links, URLs embedded in this slideshow so that when they're shared with participants, you can go visit for yourself. These graphics show energy used by fuel, by the service area, say public works, buildings, parks, and so forth, and by agency. Next slide, please. We also use Energy Cap for the purpose of this public disclosure. We've got 1,500 accounts from our facilities management office and the Fairfax County Park Authority, all included and rolled up in this benchmark, rolled up in this dashboard, and the URL is embedded at the bottom. And so this allows a very quick and easy view of the big picture over time. Next slide, please. And then you can dig down as you scroll through the dashboard and click on links for further detail, year-by-year comparisons. The one at the bottom is the entire portfolio of buildings on with the EUI over time. Next slide, please. And then the dashboard is also searchable. So in the red box here, I clicked on Centerville Regional Library. And so again, this shows annual energy use in the aggregate for electricity and natural gas, as well as cost, and then energy use by month over time. One of the things that I like to tell people is when you're benchmarking and you've got a distribution of buildings, you can highlight your successes, you can highlight the energy efficient buildings, but then don't worry if you've got buildings that show excess energy use or poor performers, because pointing them out also helps make the case that something's wrong and something needs resources to get it. There's no shame in a poor performer. You just need to be mindful and attract the resources to address that. Next slide, please. So our summary, benchmarking provides for internal record keeping and tracking, trend analysis, opportunities for improvements. And then once you do the improvements through benchmarking, you can verify that the savings that were there. It provides accountability both internally and you can grow to management, but then it also is we make it public to the constituents. And in fact, I think the Fairfax public disclosure was in large part due to constituent curiosity and demands. They were urging the county to make this information public. And ultimately, it is leading by example. You make an initial investment in the platform and the mechanisms to collect the data, and then this just continues to provide information and actionable accountability moving forward. Next slide, please. Just a few words on EUIs. So as Brandi mentioned, it's energy per square foot. And typically you want to look at buildings grouped by building type and function, because fire stations are going to behave differently and have different energy characteristics from, say, libraries. Similarly, park facilities. If you've got an aquatic center, a pool, swimming pool in a recreation or community center, that's going to be, that's going to be more energy intensive. So you group it by individual, by building type. And generally speaking, a distribution in terms of the distribution of buildings will look like this bell curve. I think many of us are familiar with the general shape on the left. Very often things are graded on a curve, and that means that most scores are there in the middle, and then you've got a few low scores on the left and a few high scores on the right. And then this generalized bell curve, in terms of, or expressed as a histogram on the right-hand side, this shows the number of occurrences of something on the y-axis. And again, that it's not exactly that bell, but you see the red curve on the right, and it approximates it as a statistical phenomenon. Next slide, please. And so for energy efficiency, we want the EUI to be as low as possible. And so in this case, the best performers are on the low end of the scale, or low end of the curve on the left-hand side. So this is kind of the opposite of, say, if it was grades in a class, you want to be a high performer on the right. But no, for energy efficiency, energy per square foot, you want to be on the low side, the left-hand side of the curve. Next slide, please. So I found a very interesting database from the Department of Energy. The Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory has this online building performance database, and it's searchable. And so just to drive the point home that buildings of a type are grouped, and when they're grouped by EUI, they show this distribution, this bell curve. This is a national data set of over 28,000 data points specifically for commercial office buildings. And you'll see that, so it's the number of buildings on the y-axis, and it's the EUI across the bottom. So it's like right there in the middle, about 100 kBTU per square foot is where there's the single most amount of buildings, and the average for this entire data set is 97,000 BTUs per square foot. So this is a nice, very elegant bell curve or distribution for commercial office buildings. Next slide, please. This is a much smaller data set, but this is for commercial office buildings in climate zone 4A, which includes Northern Virginia, where Arlington is. And you can see it's not quite as elegant a curve, but it's still generally that same bell curve. Next slide, please. So this is to transition to that little tutorial. It's just to lead up to this Arlington Green Games. Back in 2010, when the county was embarking on a community energy plan, and we knew that we were going to focus on community-wide energy use, and we wanted to both understand energy use in the community, including the private sector and the business community. And at the same time, we had received some stimulus funding through the Obama Stimulus Act and an energy efficiency and conservation block grant. And so we used a portion of that money to stand up this branded high engagement program to really reach out and engage with the commercial office sector. We made it fun. We made it a friendly competition. There were a lot of events where it was high touch with things like mingling Mondays, breakfast meetings to introduce the program, timeout Tuesdays. There were happy hours where we were sharing information with participants, webinar Wednesdays where we would be introducing topics online. Next slide, please. And so it was really a full engagement of the commercial office sector both the property managers and the tenants. Over 100 commercial tenants participated, and they all used scorecards where they would, do a before scorecard and an after scorecard to identify different specific steps that they were taking, whether it was auditing their office space, or choosing to buy renewable power, or enhancing their transportation demand management, helping consumers get, or helping their workers get to the office with transit and so forth. So there were a lot of steps for the tenants to take. And then for the property managers, we asked them to benchmark their buildings for energy use and water use. And the idea was to establish a baseline year. And then after a year-long year of programs, raising awareness for them to enter their data again and see what kind of savings they realized. We had 46 commercial office properties take part in this, with over 14 million square feet, which is a significant portion of the entire Arlington commercial building stock. The before and after showed that there's about $2 million in energy and water savings after the year of competition. We had the data, we got the data from the property managers. Well, actually, we got the data from the property managers through Portfolio Manager. We worked with the property managers. Some of them were already using EPA Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we helped others learn about that program. And so the Portfolio Manager product does normalization for weather. And so even normalized for weather, there was a $2 million reduction in the participants' energy use. Next slide, please. So just reminding you, this is the bell curve distribution of commercial office buildings in our general climate area. Next slide, please. This was the distribution of the EUIs by the participants in the Arlington Green Games. The median EUI was about 80,000 BTUs per square foot, which is a pretty good, pretty efficient building. Next slide, please. But you'll notice that this curve looks different from the previous curves that I was showing. It looks like a very nice, on the left-hand side of the graphic, it looks like the start of a very nice bell curve. But the number of buildings that were above that peak was just much smaller. And why was that? Next slide, please. And the answer, unfortunately, is that this is a voluntary program. We had great participation. Overall, we deemed it a success as a participation and promotional program. But this showed us that the property owners with, generally speaking, with inefficient building, those that use more energy than their peers, were generally non-participants. And we even had some, again, we were building great rapport with property managers. And I got to where some of them even told us, they're like, well, no, we're not entering our lemons. We're not entering our energy hogs in this. And the funny thing is, we weren't disclosing this. We weren't putting this data on the county website or anything, but they just didn't want to share their poor performance with us, which was unfortunate. Next slide, please. And so the takeaways from the Arlington Green Games on voluntary benchmarking was that the commercial property managers seemed happy to participate. We did have prizes involved, and they were happy to show off their energy efficient properties. However, the fact that some of the property managers admitted that the properties that they knew were not good performers, they just withheld them. And so from a public policy standpoint, if you really want to make improvement in the building stock, it's important to identify where the weak performers are, because those also likely have the greatest potential for savings. And so my takeaway from this experience was that a benchmarking mandate is really needed if you want to make lasting change through lasting change in the commercial office sector, and both identify the weak performers, and then, because you're not going to be able to help the weak performers improve unless you know who they are and can point them out. So it underscored for me that a benchmarking mandate is needed as a public policy tool to really move this market. That concludes my remarks, and again, look forward to discussion after the next presentation.
Thank you, John. Now we'll open things up to Patti and JoAnna.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is JoAnna Saunders, and I am the Energy Benchmarking Program Manager for the District Department of Energy and Environment. And today I'll be giving an overview of our program, the legislation that formed the program, going over some timelines, some tools we use, best practices and challenges, and then I'll hand it over to Patti, who will talk about her work with the DC Sustainable Energy Utility and how that relates to benchmarking. Next slide. So to kind of set the stage of where energy benchmarking fits into the district's larger energy and climate goals, the mayor has a vision to make DC the healthiest, greenest, most livable city in the country. And the keystone plan to make that happen is Sustainable DC, which was originally launched in 2013, and an updated plan called Sustainable DC 2.0 was released in 2019. And Sustainable DC 2.0 commits the District of Columbia to be zero carbon by 2050, which is obviously a big goal and requires a number of pieces nestled in to achieve such a drastic reduction. So the one that is most related to energy benchmarking is Clean Energy DC, which mandates a 50% reduction in total energy use in the District of Columbia. It also, this graphic should be updated, commits to 100% renewable energy by 2032, introduces net zero codes and retrofits, and also this 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2032. So the Clean Energy DC plan focuses on both new and existing buildings. Buildings account for 75% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the District of Columbia. We don't really have a lot of traditional industry here. Our industry is government and people and buildings. So buildings is the biggest chunk that needs to be tackled in order to reach these goals. So knowing that, obviously benchmarking is foundational to realize any of these goals. Next slide. The actual legislation that created the benchmarking mandate in DC was the Clean and Affordable Energy Act of 2008. So this was 13 years ago now. And this piece of legislation requires that all private buildings over 50,000 square feet and all public buildings greater than 10,000 square feet annually report their energy and water use to the District Department of Energy and Environment. This covers most buildings in DC. Our mandate does not cover any federal or foreign buildings, which is fairly unique to DC, but also might apply to Virginia as well. It establishes an annual reporting deadline of April 1st every year. It mandates that all reporting is done through the US EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. and also gives us the enforcement authority to fine buildings for non-compliance up to $100 a day every day that that building is not in compliance. And for us, compliance is not just submitting some data, it is submitting data that has been fully reviewed and accepted, because we now have quite a rigorous set of standards for what we consider to be complete and accurate data. Next slide. The second big piece of legislation that has to do with benchmarking is more recent. The Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act of 2018 was signed into law in early 2019. And this is the first major piece of legislation that updates the benchmarking law since the original legislation was passed. And so there are two big changes in this law. One is that it lowered the size threshold for private buildings required to benchmark, eventually down to 10,000 square feet. So that means all private and public buildings greater than 10,000 square feet will be required to report data by 2025. And it also established a brand new benchmarking requirement, which is that all covered buildings will need to get third-party data verification of their benchmarking reports every 3 years. And this new requirement will kick in 2024. Next slide. This graphic here shows a breakdown of the covered gross floor area of buildings in DC. So our current legislation, which is the private buildings greater than 50,000 square feet and all public buildings greater than 10,000 square feet, covers a little over 2,000 buildings and represents over 350 million square feet in the district. What you can see here is the vast majority of our covered buildings fall into that private, commercial, and multifamily buildings that are greater than 200,000 square feet. So that's the greatest majority of our square footage here in the district, followed by residential, which we won't cover, or federal, but we are able to capture the vast majority of square footage in DC with our current benchmarking regulations, and almost about 75% with the size threshold dropping down. So this really highlights that the easiest targets, the lowest hanging fruit, was that large commercial and multifamily sector. The public buildings represent a fairly small piece of total square footage in the district. However, it was very important that the public sector be a model for the private sector and kind of lead by example. So even though that's not the building sector that's going to be the most transformative in terms of energy savings, but it was really important for us to, like I said, lead by example and show that we're not just implementing these laws, but also following them ourselves. Next slide. Oh, sorry, next one. Yeah, thank you. This is just kind of a high level timeline of our legislation that's mostly just trying to show that government moves slowly sometimes and things take time. So you can see that initial Clean and Affordable Energy Act was passed in 2008. We didn't start actually implementing the program and receiving data until 2013, so 5 years later. And that was because we just didn't have the staff to implement a program. And again, you can see while we passed the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Bill in 2018, early 2019, those new requirements aren't going to take effect until a few years later. That was a little bit more intentional to give buildings time, to give our program time to staff up, but still keeping in mind that, it's not just one day you pass the law and the next day you have a full-fledged benchmarking program. And there's also delays that you can't expect. We had hoped to implement our third-party data verification requirement last year. And then obviously with the COVID-19 public health emergency, priority shifted. It was harder to make a case that this was emergency legislation when there was an actual public health emergency happening. So we've now had to delay that to start in 2024. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here in terms of things take time and there are unexpected delays, but we're happy to see that, we've established a program and it's continuing to move forward. Next slide. So I'll talk about the two main tools that we use to implement our benchmarking program. The first one being Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a tool run by the US EPA, which has been mentioned by a few folks already. Our law actually has it written that building owners are required to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's the most ubiquitous energy performance management tool out there. It was chosen because it's free and it's accessible because it's web-based. And at this point, it is the industry standard. It's currently used by more than 40 state and local governments for energy performance management. The 1 to 100 Energy Star score is really easy to understand. It helps building owners assess their energy performance. They can understand that if the 50 is a median, 75 is pretty good, 25 is not so good. And I would say over 90% of the buildings in DC are eligible to receive an Energy Star score, which means most buildings can easily understand how their building falls and how it compares to the national median. Energy Star Portfolio Manager also has a really impressive library of resources, training videos, FAQs, and their own customer service support system. So we don't have to duplicate all of these efforts. We have our own training resources that are specific to our benchmarking requirements, but we can often refer folks to the existing resources. For example, if we have someone who has never benchmarked a building before, we will automatically ask them to go watch the Portfolio Manager 101 training because it walks them through every step of how to set up an account, how to add a property, how to enter data. And then we say, if you still have questions after watching this, please come back to us. And it also allows for more automation. We use their web services for our reporting. So it has streamlined a lot of our data collection and review because we are able to actually automatically import data directly from Portfolio Manager into our own database. Next slide. And so the database that we use is the Department of Energy tool called the Standard Energy Efficiency Data Platform, or SEED. So it's a completely free tool that's used to centralize energy benchmarking data. At the beginning, before I started, all of our data was downloaded from Portfolio Manager into Excel spreadsheets. Formulas were written for data quality, and mail merges used to send out notifications to building owners. It was quite a lift. So just in the last few years, we've been searching for ways to streamline our efforts, automate as much as possible. And so we started working with the Department of Energy and became one of the first jurisdictions to use this platform. So now data, as I mentioned, is automatically uploaded from Portfolio Manager into SEED. We can set all of the data quality checks that we want based on our parameters that make sense for our own local normal distribution that we would expect to see. It allows us to track compliance, enforcement, and communications with building owners. It's not a customer service relation management system. It's not a CRM. However, we are working actively to build upon this platform to make it more of a holistic tool that can centralize all of our communications and data review. So this has been a pretty transformative tool that we've started using in the last few years for our benchmarking program. Next slide. And the final tool, but also important part of our program is our public disclosure map and also our public disclosure on Open Data DC. So once we receive all of our benchmarking reports, they are publicly disclosed on both this map that you can see here and on Open Data DC, which is essentially like the clearinghouse for all public data in the district. You can filter by a number of criteria. You can look for any year you're interested in. You can search by property type. You can search for Energy Star scores and more. And we disclose data the year after buildings submit their first report, which is how it's written in our law. So they get a year to kind of get things going, work out the kinks, and then all of that data is publicly disclosed. And this aspect is pretty important to benchmarking, which is transparency. Benchmarking data itself isn't a specific energy efficiency policy, but it is foundational to it and provides transparency to anyone who's interested in the energy performance of buildings, they can go on here and find out, you know, are they living in an energy efficient apartment building or condo? You know, commercial tenants who are looking to renew their leases and find new spaces, they might be interested in only pursuing buildings that are Energy Star certified. And this makes that information a lot more easily accessible and readily available, and it's updated weekly. Next slide. And I have mentioned this, but our data quality review process is another big component of our program and something that we pride ourselves in. We have only gotten more thorough, refined, and stringent in our data quality review now that we have the tools and the staff to do that. So now that we have greater dedicated staff time to assisting buildings both before and after our April 1st reporting deadline, we have seen in the last year a 95% submission rate and a 58% compliance rate on our April 1st reporting deadline, which is really impressive, especially compared to like 5-10 years ago when we were seeing much lower rates. And you can see this progression here of where we typically expect to see our compliance at each step of our program implementation. So we have really shifted our focus to helping buildings before April 1st and trying to get as many in compliance by April 1st as possible. And so, you know, we can see that we have about a third that are compliant before, we have over 50% that are compliant on the deadline. And then immediately following the deadline, we send out data quality emails that outline exactly what's outstanding, issues with the report, and explicit instructions of how to update them. And so once we send out those data quality emails and also our formal notices of violation, we see a pretty big uptick in compliance. I would say right now we're about 2 months out from our reporting deadline, and we've sent out data quality emails and our first round of notices of violation, and we're at a greater than 85% compliance rate at this point. Of course, there are still some buildings that won't respond to our emails or our notices, and so that's where our enforcement authority comes in. If a building is still not in compliant after the 30 days that they're given from the notice of violation, that's when we move to the actual, what we call notices of infraction. That's when we are actually fining buildings for non-compliance. We have the authority to fine up to $100 a day. We typically don't fine more than $1,000 per year. Our enforcement is not meant to be a money collection tool. We're not funding anyone on our staff through that collection. You know, we're not reliant on it in our budget. It's simply just, you do need a little bit of stick along with the carrot in order to achieve a near 100% compliance rate, which is always our goal. Next slide. Also wanted to briefly talk about staffing, because I know that that's a big question that comes up when jurisdictions are looking to start up a new program. At the beginning of the program, there was only one dedicated staff member, and that person did not come on until a few years after the legislation passed, as I mentioned earlier, which is why it took a while to get this program off the ground. And there was only one person dedicated for quite a while. Now we have about 3 or 4 total full-time equivalent employees that are focused specifically on benchmarking. Myself and my colleague are dedicated full-time, and then we also have other members of our team who may not be full-time on benchmarking, but are critical to the program and assist. So that's where it adds up to maybe 3 to 4 at any given time. And this is a little snapshot of what that timeline looked like. Next slide. Also important to address some of our key partners, which are crucial to the success of our program. The DC Sustainable Energy Utility was a key partner in just starting the program. They were the ones who operated our benchmarking help center for the first 3 years of the program. You know, they connected and still do connect building owners to energy efficiency resources. And they're going to continue to be an instrumental partner as the benchmarking threshold size drops, as we have this new third-party data verification requirement. So we're very thankful to work so closely with the DCSEU. Also, our sister agencies here, mostly the Department of General Services and the District Housing Authority, they're the ones who own, manage, and maintain the majority of our public buildings. And as I mentioned, it's really important that our public sector is leading by example. And so we put them through the same rigorous data quality checks as any of our private buildings. And so having a good relationship with the folks who manage the data entry has allowed our public building data to just rapidly improve over the years, because they want, to fulfill the requirements to the best of their ability. They know it's being publicly disclosed. And so that's been crucial to drive the success of our public sector and their responsibilities with the benchmarking law. And then, of course, local nonprofits, housing organizations, affordable housing groups, their voices for us to speak back to their community members, to their association members. It's hard for us to reach every single individual building owner in DC. So leveraging existing groups is absolutely key to making sure that the building community is aware of our upcoming deadlines, changes to our legislation, and has really helped drive those submission and compliance rates up. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people are curious, what are some best practices? There's a lot here. I'm happy to have even longer conversations with anyone who's interested, but this is kind of a bulleted list of things that I think are pretty crucial to a successful benchmarking program. Our data quality generally, and our data quality emails, notifying building owners and managers as soon as possible of what's wrong with their report and following up with them and developing that relationship with them has led to such a rapid increase in compliance that it's made a significant difference in terms of, our compliance rates soon after April 1st. We provide explicit instructions on how to make updates because we know that we're dealing with a large range of experience levels. So we're always kind of catering to the least experience to make sure that everyone understands and doesn't become more confused when we email them with outstanding issues, questions, follow-up instructions. Automation has definitely been the key part of our improving our program, utilizing those tools in Portfolio Manager and Seed that streamlined our data collection and review process. It's also helped streamline a lot of our communications. So we can actually spend more time helping building owners one-on-one and not spending time manually going through data and manually setting up email mail merges. So it just allows us to use our time more efficiently. Offering trainings, webinars, resources. Like I said, we're dealing with a huge range of experience levels. There might be an energy manager specifically hired to do benchmarking who doesn't need our assistance, but there's also going to be, for every one of those, there's 10 building managers who have never heard of benchmarking, have no idea what Portfolio Manager is, and need a little bit more hand-holding. So offering consistent trainings, speaking to those housing groups, offering open office hours, and keeping our resources on our website up to date are all really important to making sure that our benchmarkers have every tool available to them to be successful. The enforcement aspect, like I mentioned, while our focus might be on the assistance and side of things and avoiding enforcement, the authority to enforce and the threat of financial penalty is admittedly important to achieving higher compliance rates. We try and avoid it at all costs, but even just the threat of, if you don't fix this data, we can fine you, and we will, helps drive those compliance rates and helps get reports that otherwise might not be sent. And then I'd say lastly, and maybe most importantly, is customer service. Our benchmarking help center has established itself as one of the most reliable and responsive help centers in DC government. We're really proud of that. We answer thousands of emails every year and hundreds of phone calls. We're known for always picking up the phone, responding within 24 hours to emails. we work with individuals one-on-one with their reports. We'll set up meetings, we'll connect people to resources, answer their questions, and that one-on-one assistance and trust building, rapport building has led to just a greater data quality set year over year. And because we're able to work with buildings and, get to know them, notice when things look a little bit off, and help them work through any questions they might have. Next slide. Of course, with all of those best practices, there are still challenges that we've faced and overcome, that we're still facing, that we anticipate facing in the future. In the beginning, staffing, absolutely a challenge. Having no staff means that we couldn't get our program off the ground for a few years. And having a greater number of staff just in the last year or so has allowed us to offer a bunch of initiatives that we couldn't have done before, just because we're so bogged down with the day-to-day operation of our program. So for example, we were able to launch a free data verification initiative last year with the DCSEU. And that was in part due to because we had another full-time staff member hired. So we were able to run this new program and also still do all of our day-to-day data review, enforcement, customer service, help center work. Outreach and engagement, always a challenge. It was a challenge in the beginning. It's going to be a challenge again as this new size threshold drops down, and we're going to have thousands of buildings benchmarking for the very first time. So the simple act of notifying buildings that it's a requirement that they are have an annual deadline that they need to meet. They have to use specific tools. They have to collect specific data. And it's going to be an even bigger lift with those smaller buildings because it's mostly small, individually owned multifamily buildings. It's harder to reach that subset of buildings versus a huge real estate or property development portfolio that has hundreds of commercial properties. So that's a challenge we're actively working through right now. Reliable data sources is another big challenge. We are reliant on public records that don't always align with our own definitions and standards. For example, we create our covered building list using tax record data, and they provide gross floor area for buildings. And we know that their definition of gross floor area doesn't exactly match the portfolio manager definition that we use. That's a constant struggle, but it is what we have available to us and something that we have to work within the parameters of. Access to tools, like I said, the program started off using Excel and made it a little bit clunky. Seed is still relatively new to our program and has made our lives a lot easier, but it's not a perfect solution. So we're continuously seeking tools that are going to streamline our communications and data review and allow us to be more efficient. And then finally, kind of this just general lack of benchmarking knowledge and the fact that there is no national standard process for how to benchmark. Portfolio managers, an industry standard, but every jurisdiction, covers a different subset of buildings, has different requirements, both for data collection and data quality. And so there isn't a, one size fit all, this is how you benchmark. And so, we've had to work around that and, like I said, provide that one-on-one assistance to make sure that all of our benchmarkers know exactly what the expectations are of them here in DC specifically. And next slide. So that's it for my overview. We have a lot more information on our website, and our general helpline is info.benchmark@dc.gov. But I also believe my personal contact information is available. I am happy to go more in depth in any aspects of our program for anyone who's interested. So I will pass it over to Patti now.
Thanks, JoAnna. Yeah, it's I just have a short couple little things to add on to what JoAnna already said, and maybe give a little explanation on how the DC Sustainable Energy Utility fits into all of this. We actually, the idea of the DC Sustainable Energy Utility was enacted into the same act that did the benchmarking, the Clean and Affordable Energy Act, back in 2008. So it created the DC Sustainable Energy Utility. We have energy savings metrics. We have green jobs goals. We have low income spending. 30% of our budget must be spent in the low income space. We do local economic development with certified business enterprises, and we have renewables goals as well. We are ratepayer funded, so there's a surcharge on, I live in a condo building that is now subject to the benchmarking requirement. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but on the back of my bill is a charge for the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund. So a portion of every penny, a kilowatt hour, a portion of a penny of that kilowatt hour goes into that fund and funds the existence of the DCSU. We are a performance-based contract, so for each one of those metrics or performance benchmarks that you see on the right-hand side, it is a performance-based contract administered by the Department of Energy and the Environment. And so we have worked since the, we got off the ground in about 2011 or so. We really picked up speed 2013, 2014, but we have been very aligned with DOEE in many efforts, including the benchmarking since the very beginning. And last bullet, we're designed to help households, businesses, and institutions save energy. So that's just a little bit about the DCSU. Next slide, please. In terms of benchmarking activities, you saw from JoAnna's slides that we were the first administrator of the benchmarking help desk. So we had people working in our office actually doing, we were the benchmarking help desk until it got turned back over to the DOEE. JoAnna mentioned seed data. So we are, because we have that contractual relationship with DOEE, we are able to get the seed data that might be a little bit less publicly available than on the public disclosure through the seed benchmark. And so or through the seed database. So that gets inputted into our own kind of tracking system. Tracker is what we call it. So when we're going to talk to a building owner who might have a portfolio of buildings, or a building manager that might have a portfolio of buildings, we have created Power BI reports for portfolios where we can look at how every one of their buildings are doing in terms of benchmarking, but we can also show how many projects we've done with them, how many incentives they've received from us, what savings they've achieved. So we make active use of the seed database, or the data from the database. In addition to that, John was mentioning the building performance database from LBNL, and both Brandi and John mentioned EUIs. It is possible in that building performance database to actually look at EUIs for kilowatt hour EUI. So not just KBTU, where everything is converted into a KBTU per square foot, but we can look at electricity per square foot and compare it to peers in the same space, or therms, and that really helps us tailor how we might approach buildings. If we should go to them, because they're way higher than the average for electricity usage. So we should probably target our efforts to try to get them to do electricity energy efficiency measures. So having this data available really makes targeting of buildings and opportunities for us, it makes it better, it makes it easier. So the new thing that we have on the block right now, maybe 4 weeks ago, I was able to hire a benchmarking fellow to report to me. And the purpose of the fellow is to liaise between DOEE and DCSU, so between JoAnna's and her team and the larger team at DOEE, to help both of us improve our outreach efforts. So we're trying to help them figure out how to get those building owners 50,000 down to 25,000 square feet to be notified of, this condo building is that I'm in right now is one of those buildings, and my property manager had no idea that the law had been changed. So we're actually starting, the fellow is going to start benchmarking my building. She's coming over this weekend so we can go look at meters together. She will be working with JoAnna's team, and Julia Field is another, the colleague, to help outreach and work with volunteers in that sector, the 25,000 to 50,000 square foot sector, and kind of help verify, but at least get them started in their benchmarking journey. And my goal is to create an internship program that can do this all the time, kind of franchise this benchmarking fellow. It could be an intern, it could be a fellow, to where we can create more green jobs in the district that build up the people's capabilities to be able to help others benchmark. And then once they have those skills, they can go anywhere. It's anywhere throughout the United States and help, or elsewhere, to help people benchmark and building owners benchmark. So that's my goal, is to get a lot more people to be able to do this work and to do the third-party verification. So with that, I'll stop right there. I didn't have a lot to, JoAnna told you a lot, everything you need to know about the DC benchmarking effort. And we kind of just try to partner wherever we can to help DOEE in their efforts. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Patti, and thank you for the rest of our speakers. This does open up our audience time, or question and answer time from the audience. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat box. I see that we already got a few, so I will start off with the first one. Speakers, the questions again are in the chat box if you want to follow along. But the first question is for JoAnna. To what extent does your office engage with other cities with benchmarking laws to share information and help on your program?
Yeah, that's a good question. Since I have started, I've been in this role for almost 2 years. I have mostly engaged with jurisdictions that are looking to implement a benchmarking program for the first time. So there are some well-established cities across the US that also have benchmarking programs, but I would say I'm pretty regularly in conversations with folks from cities, counties, states who are just curious about, kind of similar to what I presented on today. It's just like an overview of benchmarking in DC, how it came to be, advice, pitfalls to avoid if possible. And I can see it says our common processes emerging across different cities. I think there's definitely a move towards including more buildings, which means smaller buildings and buildings across different sectors. For example, our really close neighbors in Maryland from Montgomery County, they have a benchmarking ordinance. It only covers commercial buildings, and they're moving towards also including multifamily. I would say DC was probably one of the only, in the beginning at least, jurisdictions that really cast a wide net in terms of the buildings covered. And I think also one of the ones that are, going even further by dropping the threshold down. Again, in terms of common processes, definitely the portfolio manager tool, that's pretty common across jurisdictions. I think a move towards getting data third-party verified is an emerging commonality. That's something that Montgomery County already does. It's something that we're about to implement. And I know it's something that we've talked with other cities and jurisdictions about as our own kind of suggestion to them to ensure that their data sets are as complete and accurate as possible.
Excellent, thank you. And kind of going off of that, have you noticed any common barriers or issues across different cities?
I would say the one that we hear the most is, funding and staffing, which is unsurprising. I think that could apply to most government initiatives across the board. I think we got lucky in that there was a lot of momentum behind our benchmarking law and the funding to actually staff up. And we're really seeing that now. Our team has literally doubled in size just in the last year, as I think we're pivoting towards energy efficiency and specifically building performance policies. So they're getting a lot more attention. So I guess my hope is that while that has been a kind of common barrier across the board, with this new emergence of focus on building performance, that, there's an influx of demand and funding. I guess I would also say the outreach and engagement part has been identified as a common barrier that we sympathize with. How do you notify buildings that they are required to do this, and especially the first time ever. So I would say that's another one that we've certainly noted.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for John, Brandi, and Nam. Do you use your portfolio-wide EUI as a metric to compare year to year?
I can take a stab at that. From our perspective, it's a really interesting question because it can, on the one hand, it can be an indicator for, okay, how's our whole portfolio doing? However, what's really then going to be interesting is if there's any change in it, why did that change happen? And the problem is that a change in either a very energy intensive facility, like say a data center, or a change in a very large building can really kind of skew that. So you might have great success over most of your buildings, but if there's one outlier, or even if you add a new building that has a lot of square footage, but was maybe only open part of the year or something, it can skew that. So no, I don't rely on that much or report out on it. But it's interesting because in Arlington, we had in the budget books, it was like one of our performance measures was what percent energy per square foot improvement year over year. And we would comment on that, but there are a lot of adjustments or qualifiers that had to be made leading up to that number because of things like, well, there was a new 400,000 square foot building, or there was a, sometimes the numbers would have to be adjusted if a large building wasn't open for a large period or a chunk of time. So portfolio wide, I think it's kind of limited.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to add. I mean, it has helped me when I've looked at the data just to see if there is a discrepancy that kind of looks out of place, and it gives me the opportunity to kind of backtrack and do the research to see if I can find what happened, whether it's a data discrepancy or input error on the billing or usage side. But as far as reporting on the topmost place, it's not really beneficial because there are a wide variety of facilities that are in there.
Great, thank you both. And I think you both addressed the second part of Carrie's question as well. If Carrie, you want any more elaboration, just reach out in the chat. Our next question is for Brandi, and Nam, feel free to jump in. But what is needed for a locality to receive support from the Division of Energy to stand up a similar program?
The best thing is reach out to me and Nam to get started. If demand for this service from localities is high, we may need to prioritize based on need. When you do reach out, we'll provide you with the resources to aid in identifying facilities in your local profile and acquiring relevant information to get started with your building facility profile. Acquiring energy and water billing data for all the facilities that will make up your portfolio. Once the template is complete and the billing data is acquired, we can assist with building the portfolio hierarchy, adding buildings to the portfolio, creating account and meter assignments for facilities, and adding initial billing information. We can also provide the training and support for the locality for the data analytics, report generation, and regular maintenance. But yeah, just reach out and we can start the process.
Yeah, it's always been our intentions to support the localities as much as we can. But like Brandi said, it's about knowing who out there needs our help, and how fast would you want to adopt the plan, because while we have the capability to add additional accounts and meters, it takes years and years to build up a portfolio, and we don't want to over purchase the license. So the best way, the most economical way, is for us to kind of have an idea of who and how many folks are interested in what size and volumes of the database we would need to house. And we can accommodate that.
Excellent, thank you. And have both of your emails up on the slide now. So I encourage any localities who are interested to please reach out. So our next question, it's for all of our speakers. What are the challenges in scaling up benchmarking programs to get beyond the public commercial sector? Those who seem to be the first to be involved in programs like this.
I can take a first stab at that. The one that comes to mind is, the biggest challenge is probably our multifamily sector, which represents probably about half the buildings of our privately covered buildings in DC. For a few different reasons. One, they're less likely to have dedicated staff to do this benchmarking. They're less likely to have the funding to hire someone to do the benchmarking. There's, have not as much time, because this is just an additional thing on top of their other daily job responsibilities. And then I think actually most importantly is compared to the commercial sector, a lot of our multifamily buildings are individually metered. So you're dealing with not only your common area and house meters, but potentially hundreds of individual meters. And we require whole building energy data to be reported. And so we actually then required our utilities to offer an aggregated data tool to our multifamily sector. So that was an update that was made, I believe, in 2014 in a different law, mandating that our electric and gas utilities provide aggregated, data protected meter readings for any building that has 5 or more meters. So that was absolutely crucial in order to get our multifamily buildings reporting that whole building data and getting accurate data. And it's a challenge that we still struggle with to date, because buildings are reporting just the bills that they pay for, and they think that's representative, and they look at their 100+ tenants and say, how could I ever report their usage? I don't have access to those energy bills, which we completely understand. And so then it's a whole other game of looping in 2 utilities, 2 new platforms, walking them through the process that we don't actually own, because it's, administered by the utilities, and we're just trying to be a middleman. So it is a constant challenge. We deal with it every year. Every year we find new buildings that have no idea that they're not reporting whole building data. And I would say we are lucky in that we have the autonomy to require that of our utilities. We know that that's a challenge for other jurisdictions that don't have that similar level of authority. So it is a challenge.
I'd like to chime in if I may. This is John. So it's a really good question of expanding the target market. I should mention that after the very successful Arlington Green Games for commercial office properties, the staff at the time, and we had crackerjack, wonderful staff who were enthusiastic about this and successful with it. They thought, okay, now we'll just reinvent this, and now we're going to pitch retail and restaurant with the same kind of program customized for the retail and restaurant sector, of which there is a lot in Arlington. That was a big struggle. It was a struggle to get their attention. It was a struggle to get their interest. It was a really different market. And so then after that experience, they were like, okay, so we'll back off that. And we tried a third iteration of the green games. And this was targeted at condominiums and apartments. And we didn't even call it multifamily, because multifamily is kind of a term of art that planners and government people use. But we just called it apartments and condominiums. Same thing, just as JoAnna said. Very difficult to get their attention and participation. There were some groups within individual apartment buildings or condominiums. The residents, as the tenants, were eager to try to make change happen. But yes, it's from a voluntary standpoint, it's a struggle to engage some of these other sectors.
Great, thank you. So John, Brandi, and Nam, do you see your program expanding to encompass broader types of buildings?
If no one else will comment, right now Fairfax's benchmarking includes facilities management, managed buildings, and the Park Authority. We actually, while we've rolled up all the data for county-wide purposes in the aggregate for individual accounts, we still haven't tapped into the facilities of Public Works or the Department of Transportation. And they have far fewer facilities than the other two groups I mentioned, but that's one thing within the county government that we want. We want to capture a whole of government posture. But as to the private sector, the main issue is, I think there's limited return from a voluntary program, as I mentioned, and then localities lack the authority to have a mandatory benchmarking program.
I think for us, once we have the portfolio fully implemented, even within the public sectors, we will have a pretty broad portfolio of different types of buildings. When you consider all the universities that we have that has campus housing, academic buildings, laboratories. We also have the Department of Corrections. We have VCU, MCV, so hospitals. And we also have the Jefferson Labs. So there are, even within our public sector, I think there's going to be a wide variety of different building types.
Thank you. Our next question is for any one of our speakers that want to chime in. If you wanted to compare EUIs for certain building types in your portfolio to a national benchmark, what source do you use? Is there a most often used source, for an example, like average EUI for a library?
JoAnna, would you like to take that, or or I can?
Yeah. Portfolio Manager also uses the CVEX data. So we're using that and the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. For our specific building energy performance standards, which is not something that we went into because that is a whole other program and conversation if anyone's interested. But as much as possible, we were actually using local median data. So comparing DC buildings to other DC buildings whenever possible. And I think we were able to do a national median for the vast majority of our covered buildings. There's only a few property types where there just isn't a big enough data set to compare against each other, and we had to use the national median. But we, use the CVEX data to weather normalize everything, and then going beyond benchmarking in terms of how do we use that data for other policies. It's as much as possible a local median comparison.
I think there would be great appeal for local governments for a statewide database. Have localities link portfolio manager accounts, and each locality might have 5, 10, or 20 libraries. If we link Virginia accounts, then we have a database of 200 or 300 libraries. Same thing with fire stations. And then that helps animate the conversation about, wow, what makes this library or fire station an outstanding performer? And so that's a topic that occasionally comes up, and I think it would be neat if we could find some resources to establish that kind of a state locality database, because then it's not just weather normalized, it's knowing that, okay, we're all in a very similar weather region.
Thank you. So we have about 2 minutes left. I'll try to squeeze in another question here. So trying to understand the need for additional software other than Portfolio Star Manager. Is Energy Cap and the DOE seed software just different options for additional software that's needed? Why is there this additional need? And what do these softwares do that Energy Star Portfolio Manager is lacking?
I can speak to at least us using a seed database. It is very much necessary in conjunction with Portfolio Manager. Portfolio Manager at the end of the day is the most important tool. For us, managing thousands of properties and thousands of sets of data, having a database where we can house all of that information outside of Portfolio Manager, because Portfolio Manager itself doesn't offer a way to, within the tool, review and respond to data. So for us, using Seed was really important to streamline that data collection and review process, and also to help us with our own customer service management.
Thank you, that's helpful. All right, well, we have come to time. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and a special thank you to all of our speakers. Again, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar via email, so keep a lookout for that. And thank you, hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to y'all later.
Really informative. There's a lot of